Welcome, friends, to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon. Guys and girls, I am a retired New York City police detective with over 20 years of experience in law enforcement. And if you like all things true crime related from the police detective's perspective, hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you get all things DutyRon. And hey, sometimes I got really cool guests like Jennifer Coffindaffer. Thank you, Jen, for joining us tonight. We're going to get into everything when it comes to the Delphi murders. We got a lot to talk about, but I wanted to just say thank you to you for reaching out to me and asking to do this special program. And, you know, we're going to go over a lot of things with our retired former federal, state, and New York City prosecutor. But before we introduce him, Jen, I want to just ask you, how you doing tonight? And thank you for coming.
I'm doing great, Ron. Thanks for having me on board here tonight. I think it's a important case to unpack, and I believe that it just really hasn't been fully unpacked in terms of all the facets to it. So excited to have this forum where we can unpack it from a law enforcement perspective.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because when we look at these small news pieces that play out along, you know, News Nation and all the affiliates that cover this case, you know, they have short periods of time to talk about this stuff. So I think tonight in the hour that we're going to be live, I think we're going to get into a lot of things with, you know, important components to some of the background of the investigation and how things go behind the scenes that a lot of people don't get an idea or an opportunity to see this. But before we get started, I wanted to just say quickly a special thank you to all the live chatters who join in, the people who support us through subscribing and listening to our replays, the Patreon folks, the moderators. Hey, Crime Time with DutyRon has some of the greatest moderators out there. You guys are fair and impartial, and I really appreciate you guys being tolerant of people to express their opinions respectfully. And that's really what this is about. We're all, you know, adults, and we all have different views on these cases. And my good friend Mike King from Profiling Evil said it really good the other night. He said, you know, sometimes Ron and I don't agree with each other, but at the end of the day, we're brothers from another mother, and we are from the brotherhood of law enforcement. So we know what it's like to be in the trenches. And Jen, as a federal counterpart, you know, you guys are an important part of some of these really tough investigations. And I think that the police department and the state police in Indiana, they had their hands full. You know, a population 3,000. I don't think they've seen a case, and I know for a fact they've never seen a case of this magnitude. And they needed all the help that they could get from not only the state and the federal partners, but from the sleuths that are out there, right? The tips that come in from the public. And a lot of times those folks get forgotten, but we rely on that. And I think it played heavy in this case, and it continues to play heavy. Any thoughts on that, Jen?
No, absolutely. If you look at the inception of the case, the importance of all those tips that came in, and actually the backbone of their case was showing what Libby German recorded. And it was that recording, of course, that everybody has heard time and time again, not only the words, but seen the video of Bridge Guy. Right. And that was put out there specifically to the public to do just what you're talking about. And that is get tips so they could figure out who this guy was.
Yeah, crowdsourcing comes in huge and plays a huge part when you have, and thank God she was able to capture that 40 some odd second video and audio. Had she not done that, we might not even be where we are today. So in a remote location like that, I think that played a really key element in this case. And, you know, there's talk on the YouTube streets and out there in Twitter's Twitter sphere, the Twitter sphere, and, you know, out on in some of the Twitter spaces that I've heard people speak that had she not recorded that, we may never have ever got anybody in custody. And the person we have in custody, that's suspect too. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Let me play this little piece courtesy of 88, News 88, Team 88. They do a lot of coverage on this case, but this was recommended by this young lady over here, right over here. She said, hey, Ron, let's play this. So I'm going to play this piece, and then we're going to bring on our special guest because he's got limited time, and I don't want him waiting. So let's get this rocking and rolling. This is going to give you a good overview of this case. So let's let it rock.
Is Richard Allen, the man arrested for the Delphi murders, the same man captured on one of the victim's cell phones?
ITMA's Richard Essex took the picture of Allen to state police for an explanation.
Allen was charged. The statute that he's charged under, the murder charge, also indicates that to have that charge, he has to have committed another crime like rape, child molestation, human trafficking, something along that line. Is he charged properly?
He is, and those questions will be answered in due time, and they certainly should come from the prosecutor, not from me.
Right.
But eventually, when that PC is released, it'll be clear.
In 2019, Indiana State Police released a sketch of a man thought to be a suspect in the murder of Abby and Libby. 2 years later, investigators released another sketch of a much younger man.
That guy and that guy, there's a lot of similarities. How did we get from here to here?
Well, I think that, remember, I've said from the very beginning, since 2017, a sketch is a sketch, it's not a photograph. That's the first time I've seen that.
Really?
Yeah. And I've also indicated over time that I think once we get to where we are today, we'll be able to look at the similarities of the two sketches and make a photograph, which will be Richard Allen. So I think there's a little bit of both. And I don't regret the strategy to do what we did.
Since Allen's arrest, Indiana State Police have received more than 300 tips about this case. I asked Carter if they are looking for others.
Is there somebody else out there?
Right now, we've arrested Richard Allen, and that's what the courts have allowed us to do. We are going to be searching for anyone involved in this case until it's over. And today's no different than that.
There's been a lot of activity on this today. Kagan Klein, they had 5, the prosecutor dropped or dismissed 5.
I did see that this morning.
Is there any correlation between those charges being dropped and the search that was performed in the Wabash River?
No, absolutely not.
Has he?
I think he was charged with 30 counts. They've dropped 5. He still has 25. So it's important to report that too.
Right.
The case has not been dropped against Keegan Klein.
I asked Superintendent Carter if Klein had been cooperative, and he declined to discuss Klein any further. Now a new judge must decide whether to unseal the probable cause for Richard Allen.
The probable cause, I suspect, is going to answer a lot of questions that I have here and that we talked about on Monday. Will it answer all of our questions? Or is there still?
Remember, this case is 2,100 days old, almost. And the facts in their totality will come out at trial. And not until then. I can appreciate the desire for our citizens to have these questions answered. And my response to that is it will come. But if any of us said something that would be detrimental to the criminal prosecution of the person or persons that killed Abby and Libby, and I was responsible, you should hold me accountable too.
Staying with ITM8 now, the judge in the criminal trial of Richard Allen has stepped down from the case.
The state Supreme Court announced Judge Benjamin Diener's decision earlier this evening. Now, it comes after he lashed out at a public's bloodlust for information in the case. News 8's Drew Blair has more.
Richard Allen, who faces 2 counts of murder in the 2017 killings of Abby Williams and Libby German, has been in the White County Jail since shortly after his first court appearance last week. On Thursday, Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lesenby asked that Allen be moved to a state prison for safekeeping. He stated that the sheriff's office cannot provide the services, attention, or supervision necessary to ensure, protect, and guarantee the safety or security of the defendant, staff, or facilities. Judge Benjamin Diener granted the request that morning as part of a highly unusual 2-page order that lashed out at attention and media coverage of the case. Diener wrote, "The public's bloodlust for information before it exists is extremely dangerous." He continues with, "All public servants administering this action do not feel safe and are not protected." Diener is the judge who agreed to a prosecution request to seal the probable cause affidavit that outlines the evidence justifying Allen's arrest, including the rare move to keep the information private even after Richard Allen was in custody. Wish TV has filed requests with the court for the affidavit to be made public. That is common with nearly every criminal case in Indiana. In Thursday's order, Diener went on to write, all public information will be available the second it exists. And when the public peddles misinformation with reckless abandon, we all are not safe. Judge Diener also noted that when Richard Allen appeared in court in an unannounced initial hearing, he was wearing protective gear. Diener says it was to protect the defendant from the public.
Meanwhile, a state Supreme Court spokesperson says the new judge in this case will be Frances Gull. She served as a judge in the Allen County Superior Court since 1997. She was a finalist for the state Supreme Court in 2012 and one of only 5 judges in the state that led a case with cameras in the courtroom. It's unclear what the change will mean for the timeline on deciding whether to make the probable cause.
Well, that was interesting. And I tell you, that covered quite a bit of information, Jen. A lot to unpack there and a lot of extra data. Any thoughts on that before we bring Pete in?
Oh, goodness. You know, I have thoughts on so much that was said there. I mean, can I just say really quick, hell yes, he was cooperating. When the question is asked, was he cooperating? He was trying to cooperate. I'm not sure how much viable information, but I was sort of put off by the cloak and dagger and hiding everything. You know, we talked about this, Ron. The process of getting something sealed is you as an investigator show your prosecutor, and as a collective prosecution team, you make the decision that because of XYZ, because of particular threats, because of loss of information, because of informant information, that you're protecting the informant, and of course, pre-arrest, you don't want anything out that could hinder the arrest. So that's why you seal. In my career, I have never seen the entirety of a case sealed. Yeah. Not the entirety. You seal particular documents, and typically, once that arrest is made, you unseal. Are there other cooperators involved in this deal? I think one might be 6 foot under. So I just struggle with what is really happening here. I'm just going to call it the way it is, keeping it real.
I understand, and I concur with quite a bit of that. But without further ado, I promised him 5 minutes. We're 11 minutes into the show. Our next guest here is a former federal, state, and New York City prosecutor, Peter Crusco. He's a unbelievable 40 years of experience, a former prosecutor, a criminal attorney, trial attorney, commercial litigator. He does it all. And he's been on Crime Time with DutyRon, courtesy of Joe Murray. Matter of fact, Joe Murray, when he ran for Queens District Attorney, he said that this was going to be his right-hand man. I think he would have been the main guy, and Joe would have been his right-hand man. Pete, thank you for joining.
Don't let Joe know. Don't let Joe know that.
I had to put the dig in because I know that he's listening, or will eventually be listening.
Joe,
Pete,
I didn't say it. Joe, I love you.
Yeah, well, Joe, he knows I love him too. Okay. Pete, thank you so much for taking out your time. You have an extensive extensive experience in the federal, in local courts. I gotta just put it right out to you. What's your take on this case and what we just listened right here, Pete?
Well, I think I can only base it upon my experience. Usually, when we would get an arrest warrant, okay, when the defendant gets arraigned, the warrant usually gets released, unless there's some really heavy-duty confidential information in that warrant that we can demonstrate to the court there is a compelling need to keep it from becoming public and from getting into the hands of the defendant. Now, what could that be? Well, could be several, but in thinking about cases that I handled, I mean, the major reason would be, number one, an informant was involved, and that informant's safety is still at issue. That would be a compelling reason. Number two is some investigative strategy or mechanism which law enforcement doesn't want to get out there right now. That would be a compelling reason. Another compelling reason would be you're seeking a co-conspirator or a co-defendant.
Right. Yes.
And that would be a compelling reason, especially if you're afraid that if the person has any inkling that you're on his tail or her tail, that they're going to run and perhaps leave the country and go to a country in which you can't get extradition. Those are the three main reasons. Another reason is maybe a third-party witness that is a little bit shaky, that you need a little bit more time to sit down with him or her and build up his or her confidence. And then there's always the super secret federal request. If there's some other federal investigation going on, and the federal prosecutor makes the specific request to you, and it's a compelling one, you have to bring it to the judge, and you have to.
Can I just stop you just for a second, because I want to talk about a possible component here. We have the secondary subject, Keegan Anthony Klein, who is being held on now 25 charges of child pornography, right? So this is what you just said, and I'm sorry that I cut you off. And it's not really a cutoff, but I want to just expand on this a little bit. We have this, I can't even call him a gentleman. We have this savage who's incarcerated right now. He had 30 charges of child pornography against him. He was communicating the day of this murder, February 13th, 2017, with one of the decedents. And here is the component, Pete, that you are just speaking about here. That could be one of the primary reasons, or a reason why they're looking to seal this stuff. And again, I'm sorry to cut you off in the middle of your thought, because I thought that was important to talk about it.
No, absolutely. And in cases that I've handled with that type of situation, the judge would usually ask me to ask the federal prosecutor to actually come to court and see the judge in chambers, and the federal prosecutor would have to lay out exactly what the compelling evidence is and why it's necessary to keep the affidavit, the arrest warrant, sealed. So it isn't something that is lightly taken, because what we're essentially dealing with is the defendant's right to defend himself, and his right to know the charges against him, which are all part of the Fifth and Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Not something that you want to play with, because there could be grounds to throw out a case if a higher court were to find that the prosecution played fast and loose with those rules. What's an additional concern here is that the defendant doesn't have an attorney. He's asked to retain an attorney. Most of the times the defendant would say, well, I'll take legal aid. And he would take legal aid until such time as somebody would offer to pay for a private attorney, whatever. But he'd have an attorney at all times who would then be fighting for his rights and telling the judge, hey, what you're doing is not right, and making a motion to a higher court, appealing the bail order or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's an additional issue here.
And Pete, I'm going to put this up on the screen. Lynn from our live chat, Lynn GMB, she says this Keegan Klein case opened up the biggest child pornography ring in Indiana's history. So, it's all big stuff. And I know, Jen, I was watching you write stuff down. I know that you have questions for Pete.
I do.
Pete, just before Jen gives you some of her thoughts, what are some of the other things that maybe we as laymen wouldn't necessarily pick out from the information that I shared with you today, and from your looking into this? Anything?
Well, the other thing is you have to remember that's a small, close-knit community, and the more information that is leaked out there, the more of a potential to prejudice and bias the jury pool. And the prosecution, the police have to be very concerned that this case could be shipped, 1,000 miles away, if they determine that the jury pool has been tainted. This case is homemade to make a motion for a change of venue because of the nature of the publicity. So I think also one of the reasons why they're trying to keep everything sealed is publicity can taint a jury pool. And if the jury pool is tainted, a motion to change venue can be successful and will be problematic for the prosecution. Not only are you trying the case in front of a group of people who aren't the community that you work in, but you're going to be shipped somewhere, and it's tougher then to deal with witnesses and to deal with your office and everything else you have to deal with during the course of a trial.
Yeah. Jen, I'll let you jump in with your questions for Pete.
Yes, a few questions here. First, have you ever seen the entirety of a case, of a 5+ year case, almost a 6-year case, be entirely sealed?
No, I have to say no, but the part of the situation is, look, there's all sorts of freedom of information laws. Most of them are negated by the investigatory exemption, which says that you can't release a case, the investigative reports of a case while an investigation is active. Many times, because of the nature of law enforcement and the media in New York City, the same people that you're dealing with on the street who are trying to report to the public what's going on with the crimes are the same people you see or you run into the bars and the street. So you usually have some type of relationship with them, and this type of relationship feeds off each other. So there is a natural instinct to want to chat and the like, and you have to protect against that, because, as I said, you can taint a jury pool very easily, as well as be subject to investigation if you're releasing information which is considered highly confidential grand jury material or the like. There are laws prohibiting the disclosure of material that you obtain pursuant to grand jury subpoenas. If you were to disclose that material, you'd be subject to investigation, subject to discipline by the bar association.
Right. And of course, I'm not talking about those types of materials. I'm talking about the entirety of a case, and particularly in this case, the affidavit that would have supported the charges against him, which is still under seal, and why that could not have been released, redacted, because my understanding is he doesn't have it because he isn't retained by counsel. So that's not going to be entrusted to him either.
Right. And actually, that's pretty lucky for the prosecution that he hasn't retained counsel, because that is a built-in reason for them to keep it from him and to demonstrate to the judge, look, we don't want him to get it because he's the one that we're trying to keep it from. We could give it to his defense counsel, and his defense counsel could be ordered not to disclose it to him, but to use it in his defense for a specific amount of time. But here, there is no defense counsel, so it works to the benefit of the prosecution.
Also, can you touch on where we are actually possibly getting into the waters of misconduct from the standpoint of the speed in which he is able to see his charges and needs to be retained? What are we looking at timeline wise?
Well, that to a certain extent is in a defendant's hands. He can at any time say, I want legal aid or I want public defender. He has the right to have counsel of his choice. An attorney can't be forced upon him, even if he's not making the wisest decision. The decision he's making right now is not the wisest decision, obviously, and it, in fact, works to the benefit of the prosecution. But until such time as he realizes that, you can't force an attorney upon somebody. You can have a hearing and determine whether or not he's making an informed decision. And the judge can have this hearing and say, look, I think they call it a Gomberg hearing in New York State, and which you request the hearing. Usually the judge on his own, what they call sua sponte, meaning he does it on his own, asks the defendant, do you understand you have a right to a counsel? You have a right that counsel be paid if you can't afford one, and you have a right that that you may be jeopardizing your rights if you do not get counsel in an expeditious manner. But at this point,
I got something to add to that, Pete, because I read just before we went live that this defendant is requesting time. I think he's got till November 22nd. And if I don't have the date right, please, my Google warriors and all my people who do the searching, it's somewhere around November 22nd. He is going to retain private counsel. So I think if my 58-year-old brain was listening correctly, Jennifer, I think you gave me the nod. November 22nd is the date for him to retain counsel. And I've been in many courtrooms where I've heard Supreme Court judges and lower circuit criminal court judges give defendants time to retain counsel. And
well, I just checked the record, and right now it says November 17th. He must retain counsel by November 17th because November 22nd is the hearing on the probable cause.
Is the hearing. I didn't want to interrupt to explain my nod.
So essentially, whoever he gets as defense counsel, if he waits until the 17th, will have only 5 days to prep for the hearing.
And that's not going to be appropriate. They're going to ask for probably more time.
Absolutely.
Jen, I don't want to interrupt you because I know you have some questions, but I have a whole 2 sheets. So, I wanted to touch with you, Pete, because time is important here, and I know that I want to keep you, and I know I did it to you the last time. Capital punishment. It's on the books in Indiana. They haven't utilized it since 2009, but it is on the books. This case, obviously, when I looked at it quickly, and I'm no attorney, but I did read Indiana law, and it looks like this one would fall in that. Could you expand on that a little bit, Pete?
Well, once we get into the capital punishment area, most judges will give the defendant super rights, meaning that they will make sure that whatever rights he has, whatever search and seizure, the affidavit or whatever, they will scrupulously protect those rights because what we're dealing with is a result that could consequently be the end of his life. So it will increase the amount of work on everyone and the judge, and it will certainly increase the level of professionalism of the attorneys. They're usually on capital cases. There's usually a requirements to handle those type of cases. The extent of scrutiny will be greatly enhanced.
And correct me too if I'm wrong, Pete, the prosecutor as well, you need quite a bit of a threshold. You need quite a bit of, I'm trying to talk in layman's terms here. Right. They need quite a bit of, quite a strong case to go forth with the capital punishment element. And I've seen this in other jurisdictions where, they require attorneys who have experience representing defendants that have that type of experience. You can't just get Mr. Joe Blow to come and help you out like in My Cousin Vinny. It just
absolutely. Well, in one of my former offices, there would actually be a committee of attorneys of 10 senior attorneys that the DA would rely upon that would go over any case that was recommended for capital punishment, and it would be an extensive and exhaustive review by, as I said, 20 senior attorneys, and then the DA would go over it also. No decision like this would be made lightly.
Right.
If the DA would have to sign off it in the end, and if the DA was not comfortable with his people going into court and requesting it, it just wouldn't happen.
Because the last thing you want to have is a defendant saying at the end of the trial or somewhere in the middle of it, I'm not satisfied with my counsel, and now you get a mistrial. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining in, and if you haven't yet considered subscribing to Crime Time with DutyRon, please go over to that little red subscribe button and hit that subscribe. hit the notification bell. We are chatting with FBI, retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer and Pete Crusco. He is 40 years experience on the federal, local, and now a criminal defense attorney. Pete, thank you so much also for taking out your time here on a Monday evening. I know we all got to get up early and vote tomorrow here in New York. So we got to get the vote out tomorrow for our governor. So Pete, again, this case has so many moving parts, but the questions that we covered here, the judge's decision to recuse himself, it's been written that out of fear and overwhelming, his words here is he recused himself because of the public's bloodlust for information. And he cited YouTube, not per se YouTube creators. He just made a blanket statement. YouTube creators, and I don't know who those creators were. I don't want to know who they are, posting pictures of him and videos of him and his family. He expressed tremendous fear for his personal safety and his staff. In your years, your 40 years experience, you've had many in the Queens District Attorney's Office, a very busy office. I worked out of the Queens out of Queens Criminal Court, Supreme Court for quite some time. Have you had threats against your office, against judges? I know that they take this stuff seriously. Can you expand on that conversation?
Sure. Well, to tell you the truth, years ago I tried a major mobster and got a conviction. Subsequently, my office was firebombed. I was threatened. I was put in the witness protection program for a while, which was an experience. Yes, it was not a pleasant experience. In fact, one of my trials, the judge was so stressed out, he had a heart attack, and we had to adjourn the case for 3 weeks. By the way, I didn't cause him the heart attack, so.
That's some serious business right there. So, people looking at this, reading this for face value would say, oh, this judge is scared of this case. We don't know what type of threats or what type of what led him to this, but it really seems like he really didn't have to give a reason to recuse himself.
No, he didn't. And to tell you the truth, unless you're in that situation, you really don't know. And having been in that situation, it's a personal challenge. We don't know exactly what the situation was, but there's no appeal. If the judge says he can't handle it for whatever reason, no higher court is gonna force him.
Yeah. So now we have the Supreme Court Fran Gull. She's a division admin judge appointed to oversee this case. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about what a Supreme Court admin judge, like, what does that mean? This is for the audience and for people just, tuning in, watching the replay.
Well, usually it means that she was appointed by the highest level of the court as the administrative judge, because she has the disposition and the personality to deal with all the other judges, who sometimes they can be hard to deal with the the ego situation and all that good stuff, as well as dealing with their calendars and dealing with who gets what assignment and whose seniority. She obviously, if she is an administrative judge, she has a very good manner, and they respect her and respect her ability to deal with other judges. If she's assigned to this case, it means that they know she can handle it. She has the intestinal fortitude to handle it.
Yeah.
And that she has the intestinal fortitude to handle potential threats and scrutiny. You don't want to handle one of these cases if you can't survive the scrutiny.
Now, Pete, if she's a federal judge, is she receiving protection from our federal partners?
I don't think she's a federal judge. I think she's a state court administrative judge.
Right.
But at time, for instance, in New York, the state court offices have a task force.
Right.
with federal agents, and they
I meant,
can.
I meant Supreme Court, so I misspoke
Oh,
there.
okay,
So,
okay.
okay, I apologize. So if we're going from a local judge in a town of 3,000 to now Judge Frances Gull. She served on the Allen County Superior Court. So she's a Supreme Court judge. Is there any difference in her security detail as opposed to Benjamin?
Well, she, as an administrative judge, she's in charge of security details of the court officers, so she can essentially order, doubling her own security detail.
Right.
So she's got a lot more juice, as we say, to deal with that.
Yeah. Yep. So I like that terminology. It brings me back to the police department. So, she's got a lot more juice. Jen, you got anything more for Pete? Because I have a ton, but I don't want to hog the show.
No, you go ahead.
All right. Hey, so a lot of people from the audience, and first, now that I'm mentioning the audience, I want to say thank you to everyone who's given super chats. I always like to highlight those super chats and read out your questions. A few of them I missed. So while yet still today, send in a $2 super sticker, and also while yet today sent in yet another. Police off the cuff, our retired homicide detective Sergeant Bill Cannon. He has the podcast Police Off the Cuff. He does all things true crime. He sent in $20 too. I know that the sergeant is going to ask me to buy him a drink next time I see him back in New York, because he's snowbirding right now down in Florida, but it's not working out good. It's not working out good for him because he's on the East Coast. So all of my friends down in the East Coast, I hope the storm, again, you guys have had so much on the West Coast and it came across to the East. I'm saying prayers for everybody for, to button down the hatches. Jen, you also experienced a lot of property loss and things of that nature. So we send prayers to everybody on the East Coast for this impending storm coming tomorrow. Tina sends in a $10 super chat, and it has a question. And Tina, you just happened to get lucky because I took a break here. Where do you think they are going to find a fair and impartial jury in this case? Is the amount of bond a possibility for a mistrial for violation of his rights? I think the bond was set at $20 million initially, and then bond there was no bond. Pete, can you talk about bond issues and things of that nature?
Well, as far as bonding for the defendant,
yes.
So the judge has the right to, unlike New York State, which has changed the whole bail reform. But we won't get into that. I'm not that familiar with Indiana law. All I can tell you is if usually with respect to the highest level crime, which is murder, there's the judge does have the discretion, even in New York, when it comes to, despite the bail reform, when it comes to murder, the judge does have the discretion and could remand, meaning no bail. You're in until trial. So,
all right. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for that question, Tina Garrett. Thank you for being a channel member as well. Hey, I want to look quickly to the chat for any other questions. Let's see. Yeah, bail reform in New York State is just after, what was it, January of 2020, when it took a nosedive with bail reform. And then we had the wake of COVID-19 come across, and just horrible. I think there was a couple other questions that I did want to ask you in regards to court proceedings. So again, it's important that everyone in the United States has the right to the speedy trial. You talked about it. This is a 50-year-old community resident who was living in Delphi for I think he bought his home in 2006, all the way back in 2006. So this is a person who's been a part of this community, working at a local CVS pharmacy. They talked about protecting this guy and sending him up to a state prison where they had, as the superintendent said, more resources and capabilities to keep this guy safe. Now this gets our chat and all of the YouTube and true crime enthusiasts up in arms. Why do they got to protect this guy? Why don't they let jailhouse justice prevail? The onus is on the state to keep this guy alive to stand trial. Pete, do you want to talk a little bit about that decision? Because that had
Well,
everybody up in a tizzy too.
well, let me just remind people that, November 24th, 1963, Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald in front of a whole station house of police officers. Lee Harvey Oswald was the person who assassinated President Kennedy. He was not wearing sufficient protective gear to protect him, and Jack Ruby got within 10 feet of him. So I think that was enough of a history lesson for everyone, and demonstrates why, if you have a high-profile defendant, you want to protect them, because part of due process is the person gets the opportunity to have his day in court and goes to trial, and he doesn't get killed beforehand.
Right. Yeah, and it's a black eye on the state. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many additional questions, but I just wanted to get maybe anything from you, Pete, that we might have missed, or Jen, if you have anything additional. But I don't want to hold him past the time, so we're already at 40 minutes with Pete. You got anything additional for him in regards to prosecution or anything like that, Jen?
Pete, just one quick question. In your experience, if an individual cooperated and they were involved in the crime that they cooperated about, typically, doesn't the plea, wouldn't that cooperation agreement involve lack of charges or lesser charges against that individual? So in other words, in this situation, say, and I don't believe this, but say Keegan Klein was involved in a conspiracy to kill Abby and Libby. For his cooperation, typically does what would be offered would be a lesser charge from that would be what the quid pro quo would be.
Yes.
Is that your experience?
At some point, but you got to remember, until he actually complies with his promise to cooperate and actually takes the witness stand, they're going to want a heavy duty hammer held over his head, just in case he reneges on that. So typically what happens is you hold that hammer on, but there's a promise that if he testifies truthfully, that there will be a better arrangement in the future, and that has to be all in writing, and has to be turned over to defense counsel way before trial, because that will be subject to cross-examination a la mode, as we say, because that could be a motivation for the cooperator to lie, and that will be jumped on up and down. There'll be potentially days of cross-examination over exactly how the deal was worked out, how it started, and how it ended.
There you go. Hey, Debbie Jackson, who is a channel member and a good friend of Crime Time with DutyRon, she's also a retired law enforcement professional. She talked about the $20 million bond still being on record at the press conference that we saw. I believe it was last Monday. She mentioned they mentioned that there was initial that $20 million bond, and then the prosecutor said the judge said no bond. Can you talk about why that might be still on record, Pete?
Well, it can be only one or the other. He's either remanded or it's a $20 million bond.
What I'm reading, and I have no confirmation of this, but from what I'm reading is that it says no bond, but still, when you look at the records, I guess online records, it shows that there is a $20 million bond. Hold on here, I just found the comment. The prosecutor says no bond, but the paperwork and the site says bond at 20 million. Maybe they just didn't update the site. What do you think, Pete?
That's possibly it's peculiar. I mean, whatever the court records say is usually what because the corrections has to know, because if somebody shows up at the jailhouse with a $20 million bond, he gets released.
Yeah. Well, everything surrounding this case is peculiar, and I think Jen will agree with us on that. There's a lot of things that are just not the norm here, and It is what it is. But thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Debbie. All right. As soon as I get the thumbs up from Sleuthy, she's like okay, good. All right. So we have, as I told you, Pete, a guest who's going to join us here. She may have some tough questions. And Pete, you can charge her hourly for the answers. You could do whatever you want to do. Adding to the show is Sleuthy. Hey, how are you, dear?
Hey, good. I'm so happy to see everybody. Jennifer, you look beautiful as always.
Oh, thank you, Sleuthy.
I did my hair.
It looks great.
Long hair looks great always.
It does.
Pete, this is Sleuthy. Pete. Sleuthy.
Pete.
Sleuthy Pete.
Hi, Sleuthy. How are
Nice
you?
to meet you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm good.
Thanks so much.
I have
You too.
questions. I have questions about, so I know you're not very versed in kind of everything that happened here, but is it peculiar to have evidence in the form of multiple devices over multiple years, full of children as young as 5, and have that information and not make an arrest on the person who you know was responsible for it for 3 years?
Can I just enhance that a little bit, because I want you to get the full scope here. So she's talking about this second perpetrator that we talked about with the 30 charges, now 25. They dropped 5 of them for child pornography on the phone. This is the savage that was communicating with one of the decedents the day of and maybe the days before. It took years for the processing of the phone records, and that's where a lot of people are getting hung up. So I'll let you answer it. I just wanted to just fine tune that a little bit, Pete.
Well, the issue is whether or not there was probable cause to make the arrest, and when was that probable cause made. All right. So, for instance, if the speedy trial clock in Indiana is 5 years on a felony, it means that you have to make an arrest and say you're ready for trial within that 5-year period. If, let's say, 5 years go by and then you make an arrest, the question is going to be, number one, is the statute of limitations violated? If it's a 5-year statute of limitations, is it a speedy trial clock violation? So you've raised a multitude of questions that I can't answer because it's all fact-based and we don't have the facts. But I will tell you that if you don't have, for instance, in New York City Police Department has a unit called which is very experienced with dealing with the digital environment,
wiretaps and so forth.
Exactly. If this community, this county, this law enforcement is not aware and is not capable of that, it's going to take a lot longer. If the state police and the FBI were not involved at an early stage, it's going to take a lot longer. Just reading cell phone records requires a certain expertise. The cell phone records are linked to a different time frame, a different in England, whatever that you call that special
coordinated universal time.
Yeah. So you need to know that all that. I mean, I used to do this in my sleep and get nightmares. So you need an expert, and if you don't have an expert, it's going to take a while.
But I do want to say, from a law enforcement standpoint, when you go in and you see these images, you fast track it. The FBI was involved in this case from the very beginning, and it definitely had that resources. So was the state police. And for a protection of the community and of young children, it was rare that they did not jump on this for 3 years from a law enforcement perspective.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking is how many additional victims were created in that 3 years that he thought that everything was fine is my concern. And he went all over the United States.
Yeah, this guy was able to travel to Vegas, Pete. He was going on some whirlwind tour on some concert circuit. The amount of people and young kids, more importantly, that he had access to in that time frame, that's what I'm baffled that if they had enough probable cause and if they had enough evidence, why didn't they pounce on this guy sooner than later? And that's where everyone's caught up in. Unfortunately, me, myself, Pete, Jen, we don't have the answers to that because we don't have access to the case folder. Only the district attorney and the investigators have that access. And that's concerning. Look, Richard Allen, a week before he was locked up, the FBI and local and state, and they were all at his house doing a search warrant, digging up a fire pit in the backyard. There's speculation that the trophies that he took, the trophy prize that he took from the crime scene, could have been burned in that fire pit. We don't know additionally what they did. Did they go in the home? I saw footage of them coming out from the driveway with bags and with other things. So we're in the dark here. And as Pete said, it's for a good reason. Right, Pete?
Absolutely. I mean, the more information that gets out there, the more potential to taint the jury pool. The last thing the prosecutor is going to want to do is try the case 500 miles away.
Yeah,
it's a burden.
Jen, did you?
Within limitations of what would be problematic. For instance, even the scheduling order was sealed, and the initial charges themselves were sealed, and they ended up unsealing those because, of course, that would not fall in the parameter of the items you previously discussed. That's where the entirety of the case being sealed, as opposed to those documents that are problematic being sealed, usually makes more sense. I'm just saying that's how it's usually been handled, at least in my experience.
Well, I will tell you that a sitting judge saying that that the publicity has been such that he feels in danger will help the defense with their motion to change venue. You know, if you need evidence on a silver platter, that type of stuff is very helpful.
Yeah, it's signed, sealed, and delivered. Jen, I don't know if you sent Mandy over, one of the people that are vying for you to get more airtime. So Mandy says, "Let Jen talk more." I offered, and she said no. Pete, you're my witness on this, counsel. I said, Jen, do you want?
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, thank you.
I did, Jennifer, and I have questions for Jennifer because I was leaning into Ron Logan here, and I know that Jennifer likes to talk about Ron Logan. So my other question is kind of in terms of, you know, there were documents that were unsealed that weren't, I guess, meant to be, and then they were sealed again. And one of those things was the probable cause affidavit to search this man, Ron Logan's house, which is actually the property that the girls were found at, in fact, 1,400 feet from his property, like from his front door. And it was filled out by a FBI agent, Nicole something, and she's the one that put all of the probable cause in there. And there were things such as that he lied about his alibi, that he reached out to someone before the girls were even found to create a lie and create an alibi for a crime that we weren't even aware he admitted or that had been committed at that point. And there were particular cell phone pings. So there were like calls and texts to and from his phone from the crime scene, like through the night, and many other things. They had ex-wives and girlfriends and stuff say other things, but there was a lot of information there. And she ended it with, we have reason to believe that there is evidence of a crime that was committed somewhere on this property, and nothing happened.
Yeah. I have a small clip, Saluthi, that I want to play about this Ron Logan guy. So I'm going to play this and then come back and let Pete answer this question. But the question really is why, if there's a treasure trove of evidence against Ron Logan, why didn't anybody pull the trigger? And that's with the lack of better terms. Why didn't anybody pull the trigger and lock this guy up? What's the worst that can happen? It gets 343, it gets thrown out. That's me saying it. It's easy for me to say that. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants a case to be thrown out. But let's just play this because this is what Saluthi is talking about here. I won't let the whole thing go. Just a little bit. And Pete, I owe you for overtime now.
8 at 5 starts now.
We begin at 5 o'clock with stunning new revelations in the Delphi Morning.
IT-Mate has obtained court documents that, for the first time, publicly describe the scene where those murders took place, what was taken from the scene, and a potential early suspect in the case. IT-Mate's Demi Johnson has been following the story from day one. Demi, this document, very powerful.
Yeah, that's right, Phil and Alexis. It's this 9-page request for a search warrant filed March 17th of 2017. Now, that's a little more than a month after Libby German and Abby Williams were found murdered in Delphi. This disturbing document, for the first time, gives us an investigator's description of the crime scene and what the suspect may have taken with him.
IT-Mate obtained the request for the search warrant from the Murder Sheet podcast, the same group that first published the interview transcript of Anthony Schott's suspect, Kagan Klein. IT-Mate has confirmed the document is authentic. The document, written by an FBI agent, describes what investigators found when they discovered the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German on February 14th. The agent writes, a large amount of blood was lost by the victims at the crime scene. Because of the nature of the victim's wounds, it is nearly certain the perpetrator of the crime would have gotten blood on his person or clothing. Authorities also found that 2 articles of clothing from one of the girls was missing from the crime scene, while the rest of their clothing was recovered. It also appeared the girls' bodies were moved and staged. The agent goes on to say, based upon my training and experience, it is common for perpetrators of this type of crime to take a souvenir or in some fashion memorialize the crime scene. The agent also references the video on Libby's phone, confirming it was 43 seconds long. Up until now, only a few seconds have been made public. It's this short audio clip where you hear the suspect talking to the girls. The agent also confirms the girls were being followed by the suspect on the Monon High Bridge Trail. The agent also says there were no visible signs of a struggle or fight. The search warrant is for the property of Ronald Logan, who owned the land where the 2 girls were found dead. You see him here in this video shot by Wish TV in 2017, just days after the girls were murdered. It describes his activity the day the girls went missing. The agent says Logan claimed someone drove him to an aquarium store in Lafayette on the afternoon of February 13th, at the time the girls disappeared. But the agent says these statements were found to be factually false and intentionally designed to deceive law enforcement officers. The agent says Logan contacted his cousin and asked him to tell that story before the bodies were found. Based on investigators' experience, it is reasonable to believe that the creation of an alibi prior to the discovery of a crime indicates culpability or knowledge of the crime. I asked the founders of the Murder Sheet podcast why they...
Pete, I'm going to stop it right there. That's exactly what we're talking about. And I saw you were taking some notes. Any thoughts on this?
Well, my question is, they got a search warrant to search Logan's property. What did they find? Was there an inventory done? Was that also disclosed? I'd like to know the results of that. I mean, it's obvious that what they're looking for is evidence at the scene of the crime. Any indication of any of the type of evidence of the murder was found in the area. And obviously the fact that the warrant was disclosed, it brings up other issues too. But that's my thoughts.
Well, I can answer that. They didn't find anything. It was over 30 days after the crime was committed. What they did find, interestingly enough, was a cleaning product. And again, this type of cleaning product would be, possibly freezing under these conditions, but was found outside. And so it was just interesting that you would have a cleaning product possibly used to clean up in this situation outside in freezing weather and temperatures in Indiana at this point. So, but they did not find anything.
You have it.
So then my next question is, if was this product, I'm sure it was dusted for prints, and it would appear as though there was nothing found then on that either, right, Jennifer?
No, I do not know that to be true. I don't know whether it was analyzed for prints, but I know if the Bureau, and I know this was an FBI search warrant, and the FBI is meticulous especially in a case like this. They would have their evidence response team there, and they would do everything by the book, room by room. So I believe that it was fully processed.
Okay.
Wow. Hey, Pete, let's unpack. Yeah, this is the YouTube channel name. Yeah, let's unpack that. Sends in a super chat for $10 and says, "Hey, Ron, can you buy Pete a coffee or a beer? Thanks for staying and answering, Pete." So that was someone saying thank you to you.
Thank you.
I got another couple of minutes of this because this will tell us a little bit more, and then I promise I'll let you run, Pete.
Okay.
So let's let the rest of this thing play. Sleuthy's laughing. She's like, "Oh,
Because someone asked if I'm in my pajamas, and I am.
you fell into Ron's web." All right, here we go.
Asked why they believe this new information is significant.
This is a situation where you've had a lot of speculation or rumors going around that sounded pretty realistic, or perhaps, sounded like well thought out. But it's another thing to sort of see it just in black and white on a court document.
I feel it is really important to get actual court documents where people are actually have to swear an oath that what they're saying is actually true.
Now let's tell you a little bit more about Ronald Logan. It's important to note Logan is dead. He died in 2020. He was charged with a probation violation for driving with a suspended license. He was never formally named a suspect and never charged in the Delphi murders. But in this document, the FBI agent says Logan's voice is not inconsistent with that of the person in the video. Now, we showed you that video of Ronald Logan in this story, and in searching through our archives, I found this interview with him shortly after the girls were found. Here's what he told us about the day the girls went missing.
Monday afternoon, I was in Lafayette Aquarium World getting tropical fish for my aquarium. So when I came home, one of the neighbors stopped and asked permission to come back here and look for the missing girls, and that's the first time I knew anything about it. So I fooled with my tropical fish the whole time that the search was going on Monday night, but then they didn't find them until Tuesday at around noon or 1 or whatever it was.
Stunning new details, Demi. I know you reached out to the girls' family. They had no comment. But what about state police and the FBI?
So I did just receive a statement from State Police Superintendent Doug Carter. He tells me, "I would like to remind the public that this is an active and ongoing investigation, and we will do everything we can to protect its integrity and to not try it in court of public opinion. We cannot publicly convict someone based on a single document which was not released by investigators. Our profession will not allow us to speak on what we think, but to always speak about what we know. This is especially important with the heinous murders of Abby and Libby. We must continue to be mindful of their surviving family members and the entire Carroll County community who are affected by this investigation." Now, the FBI also sent a statement saying it does not have any more details to share at this time.
Pete, what's your thoughts on that statement from Doug Carter, the superintendent of the Indiana State Police?
Well, it's as expected. It's vanilla. I mean, you have to protect the jury pool. Protect the jury pool is the most important thing. But how did that statement get out? That's the issue for me. But it is what it is. It's out there, and
I believe, Sleuthy, I believe it was from that podcast, right? Those.
Yeah. Are we talking about the documents?
Yes.
The probable cause affidavit, and there was also an interrogation and statement from that Keegan Klein that was 200 pages long that was also released.
Let me give a couple. Let me just clarify. So Ron Logan himself released the affidavit to various news outlets.
Okay.
And it was believed he did that because he did it after the focus got put on Keegan Klein.
Okay.
Okay, and the Keegan Klein was released accidentally. It was a clerical error, basically, where it was not sealed. And so it got out, and then they quickly took it down, but it was too late because too many people had gotten their hands on it.
Okay.
Just some points of clarification.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, we got to let Pete run because, again, he's got an early morning. He's probably got to be in court or do something business-wise. He agreed to come on for 40 minutes with us, 35, 40 minutes, and it's an hour. We're already an hour into this
It's
thing.
like an FBI interrogation. They tell you it's going to take 10 minutes, and 4 hours later, you're still there.
Sleuthy, you have anything to rapid fire at him before we let him go?
No, I don't think. I want to thank you because I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We don't get to
Robin?
hear from the prosecutor usually.
It's it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Ron. Thanks, Jennifer. It was nice talking with you and Sleuthy, and good luck.
Yeah, Pete, will you
Thank you.
promise to come back again with me and the ladies another time?
Who could turn down that invite?
I'll do my hair again for you, I promise.
It looks wonderful.
All right. Pete Crusco, thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. There he goes. Pete. Hey, that was interesting. And we could have, as we know, as the YouTube true crime community and all the sleuths out there, we could have kept Pete on for another 3 hours and questioned him because we have so much. I have pages that I didn't even get to that I wanted to ask him. But I think that last piece that we played was telling because it gave him, I didn't share any of that stuff with him. That was the first time he probably saw that. A little bit on Ron Logan, and people are in the chat here. It's divided. Some people are saying, they think Ron Logan had nothing to do with it. I think that, if you ask me my opinion of it, I feel that he does have something to do with it. He did have something to do with it. He's now deceased. And as they say in the police business and in the prosecutorial business, dead men tell no tales. And once you're dead, you can't be tried. Look at Brian Laundrie, look at Jeff Epstein, look at, I could just go on and on here. So, all of this conversation, again, could, really lead us to nowhere. We have to go with what we have. And what we do have is a perpetrator in custody. And we have a second piece that could be, that could be a part of this, still in custody. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be going to trial soon. And I feel strongly that, the hair and those unidentified hair and fibers may possibly come back to our defendant that's in custody right now. We don't know because there's no, there's no information. Go ahead, Sleuth.
Was something that I had thought about initially when I saw this come out, and I was like, why would they all of a sudden, and why are they digging up the backyard? When I went through the wife's Facebook profile, because I knew it was only a matter of less than 24 hours before it would be gone. I'm screenshotting everything. And I put in to my girls, I said, look, here's a cat in case we need it. And there was 2 cats. And I almost wondered if maybe the unidentified was some type of cat hair, and maybe there was a funeral for the cat because the cat did die and get put in the yard, maybe, right? It could have been an unidentified animal hair, right?
Yeah, it could be anything, Sleuth. But I would say that if they're naming it, if FBI is naming that unidentified fibers and hair, fibers could be from clothing, fibers could be from any type of anything. But the hair is going to be, I think they would specify and say, animal hair. This is going to be human hair. And this could be something that could shock us all if and when they release, any type of information. Listen, if the judge deems that they're going to release the probable cause affidavit, tons of it will be redacted. When trial happens is when everything's going to be exposed, and we could be waiting who knows how long for that.
The way Pete was talking about that judge, I think she probably is a badass.
Yeah.
Like we've heard.
Yeah.
Sounds
I asked him off the air about her, and he had nothing but good things to say about her. So today I had a conversation with him, and then tonight Jen and I had him in the behind the scenes before we went live. We had a brief conversation. Jen, what did you think about our guests that we had on tonight?
Oh no, I think he's good. It's always good to have the prosecutorial and defense attorney, and he was both and is both a defense attorney now and previously in prosecution. Share his insights and corroborate what we've seen in our careers with our prosecutors. So I thought it was good.
Yeah. it's always good to hear, the other side, because, from what we did in our professions, you on the federal level, me on the, regular state, municipality with the police department. I dealt with the state quite a bit, with the parole department. So I did deal with New York State quite a bit. But when you look at what happens when a person is in the custody and being tried by the prosecution, it's invaluable to get a look at these retired guys. And Pete, like you said, he was on a heavy duty case and his office was firebombed. I mean, talking about dealing with the mob and so forth, you're looking at a town of 3,000 people. This judge definitely got spooked. And we don't know if there was calls for death threats to him. That was not mentioned here, but he certainly, and on no uncertain terms, said the public's bloodlust for information. That's a pretty damning statement right there. I mean, Jen, I don't think I've ever heard a judge make a statement like that. The public's bloodlust for information, and YouTube creators presenting pictures and videos of him. Like, I don't know.
Well, the entire order was very unusual.
Yeah.
And orders I've seen that are ordering individuals to be changed of venue, where they're being housed, they very specifically usually line out particular threats, or they line out what evidence they have, not generally speaking about YouTubers and generally the public wanting information. And of course, there were other details that were completely off topic regarding salaries and all sorts of things. So I found it to be a very unusual order. We talked offline about that, and Pete agreed. Just very unusual, but he's recused himself, which I think is very helpful for the case, because the biggest concern I see when I see what's happening is just concerned that we're not going to have, that we're going to have issues, that if indeed Richard Allen is responsible, if that is the case, you don't want what's happening to taint a conviction and for something to be overturned because his constitutional rights, weren't protected. So from the get-go, as I keep speaking about this blanket ceiling, that's my concern.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Ron.
The question that I forgot to ask Pete, and we'll ask him when he comes back, is, the investigators and in particular the superintendent of the police department, the state police, he is the face and the voice for this case. He's not investigating the case. I want the live chatters and people who watch on a replay. He is not interviewing and interrogating anybody. Okay. But when the investigators that are in charge of this case, the lead squad, whether it's, 5 people, 10 people, I've never heard numbers on who's assigned. And this thing's 5.5 years old. But when they're still asking for tips to come in, that's when I wanted to ask Pete as a prosecutor, what his thoughts were on that. And we'll get him back and we'll ask him a whole bunch. I'm sure Sleuthy is going to put together a battery of questions for Pete next time he comes and joins us. But I really enjoyed, this hour and 13 minutes that we had to talk about this. Now, I had that piece, Jen, that you asked me to play about the superintendent saying that he was at peace and so forth. I didn't get a chance to play that. And I think it's only 3 minutes. You want me to play that?
Sure. Yeah, I have so many thoughts here, but yes.
Well, Jennifer, is it ISP that was doing most of everything? ISP?
Well, yes, but the Bureau was very much involved initially, and then, of course, has been absent regarding this piece.
Right. And I think they called in the Bureau, and Jen, you and I think will agree on this, is because of this department was not, they didn't have the resources to handle a case of this magnitude.
Exactly. And neither did the judge. The judge in the order talks about how his bailiff doesn't know anything about the law. His clerk is brand new. He reels off, I think, the 3 people he has supporting him and why they're, not able to.
Yeah. And the community, of course, they love their police, right? So they're leading the charge behind him, and really they don't have any choice. You got to get behind your local and state and federal partners. But again, the community knows better than any of us what kind of police department this is and how vast their resources are. And this is not a knock to them. I'm just saying sometimes you get in over your head in some of these smaller parts of the United States where you need that federal help. You need a crime lab to process things because they don't have it. You go back to the station house, there's a pole there and 1 cage to put prisoners in. You can't put 15 prisoners in their holding cell, I guarantee you, at the precinct, And
just the expertise. Unfortunately, the Bureau wasn't involved in the initial crime scene analysis. They didn't have the ERT there that has done this over and over and over again and has certain protocols that are followed. These are guys that likely have never, a 3,000 person city ever analyzed and done that kind of work on a double homicide of 2 children.
Right. And Ed Wallace will tell you straight out, processing a crime scene and getting that evidence while it is all in pristine condition is paramount. It's important. If you screw it up, you only got 1 chance at this thing. You can't go back and say, let me do a do-over, So if someone is able to come back and clean up a crime scene, and we see it in a lot of these cases, shame on the investigating authority for not, securing the scene and getting the proper people in there to process it.
And they don't always ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these agencies, they don't want to ask for help. It's a pride issue, and they're just like, no, we can handle this, when in fact that they can't. So Jen, you've been around long enough that you've seen this stuff.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the majority of my career was on task forces with the locals. And personally, for me, I loved working with the locals and working on task force and being in the meat of these cases and on scene. But it's typically a difficult hurdle.
Yeah.
The relationships are sometimes strained, and there's a lot of egos involved. And this case, unfortunately, I believe had some of that.
Well, and families and victims suffer. My town is about 1,400 people. And there was a incident where someone that everyone knew was found deceased in the house, and it got labeled just as a suicide, and the family had to go in and clean up, and it was never looked into. And to this day, and that was, we'll say 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Wow. And to this day, they can't get over the fact that something else happened, and what can they do now?
Yeah,
it's terrible because they didn't want to ask for help. It's a small, prideful country town.
Yeah.
Ron, I did want to make a little bit of a clarification just in regard to Ron Logan, if I may. We touched very generally about the probable cause that exists, and I just want to make it very clear. I believe probable cause was established that he was involved in this crime. So probable cause was established, and that included at 2:07 a ping on his cell phone in the area where the girls were. Not at his house, but in the area where the girls were found. And recall, 2:09. At 2:07 was the last point at which we have the cell phone Snapchat that Libby made. So literally 2 minutes later, and I'm sorry, I need to clarify that. 2 minutes later, you have Ron Logan at the Monon Bridge. So that's at 2:09. And then in that evening, you have a ping at 7:56 and at 10:30 near that crime scene. And I think that's very, very relevant and really contributed to that probable cause.
Yeah, Jen, it's 100% relevant. But at the end of the day, when that was all presented and put into the, it goes to the bosses, they look at it, then they forward it to the prosecutor. Prosecutor looks at it and makes the decision. I said, I touched lightly with Pete. There's many times I've gone with cases and the prosecutor told me you don't have enough. And I thought I had a ton. And there's really no arguing back and forth. You can't talk a prosecutor into going before a judge and getting an arrest warrant signed. And that's what didn't happen here with Ron Logan.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that evidence was there and present. And if it was in fact there and present, my question is why? Why wasn't an arrest warrant issued?
Well, my understanding is, Ron, interestingly enough, it had to do with age. He was 77, and it was my understanding that it wasn't believed that he would be capable.
I lost an 87-year-old for shooting a 55-year-old in the head.
Well, believe me, I don't support it, but I'm saying that was one of the contentions. And then, of course, early on, we have the footage of them saying, we thought he was the guy, but basically there was an alibi. And it wasn't until later that that alibi was determined to be false. Yeah. So, I think that contributed. But I think back to your point, Ron, is we're right now looking at Richard Allen.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's the one behind bars. He's the one that Superintendent Carter is emphatically saying was involved. We have no probable cause because they released no facts. Right. So I don't think anybody in the community or anybody is saying he didn't do it. We're just saying we don't have any facts. And then there was one nugget in his press conference that it was very unusual. And that nugget was he thanked the lab, not once, not twice, but he emphatically thanked the lab. Now, I've been in a lot of press conferences, Ron. I know you probably have too. I know we've watched many. And normally you thank more of the department. Thank you for, the FBI, or thank you, U.S. Marshals, or ISP, my group, everybody. Not like that. That's what makes me think they must have something that's lab related.
Yeah, could be. Hey, let's listen here. And I want to thank everyone for the super chats. Wild Z Pony, she said, thank you so much, DutyRon, for your riveting viewpoints and high profile intelligent guests. That's Jen and Pete. I absolutely love being a part of the DutyRon family. Well, we love having you here and all of the others that I may have missed. And again, I try to just keep on the topic and the content. So if your super chat came in and I missed it, I am going to thank you again over and over again in the comments section down below. So that's where I'm going to ask to continue the conversation. That's what's great about YouTube and these live streams is that after we're done, you can leave us comments down below, whether it's for me or Jennifer or Pete or Sleuthy. You could leave it down below at one of us, and we will answer your questions when we get to them. So thank you so much. Hey, let's play this little piece with the superintendent because, and then we're going to wrap it up because this old man's got to get to bed. I got to wake up early to go vote. So I want to just play this little piece. I think this is going to be relevant to what we're talking about.
Now, I want to ask before you play, to be clear, he's just going off of what he's been told by the people who are actually investigating, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because he's not doing any of the investigating himself. He's an executive, and he is the mouth of this investigation. He is the voice of the investigation, and he actually mentions it here. He says it several times. Jen and I spoke about this. He talks about, hey, I'm not out there pounding the pavement. I'm just talking to you guys.
But he is the decision maker, you would agree. At the end of the day.
He's the boss. So when they come over to him with investigatory stuff, he'll look at it and he'll say, okay, give it to the DA. Okay, because he has to sign off on it. So let's listen. This is only 3 minutes. So, and then we'll wrap it up. I think I'll go from the beginning. The hell. I was going to start at the middle. Let's start from right here.
is going into the state's custody for safety reasons. Court records show the Carroll County Sheriff filed a motion to transfer Richard Allen from their custody to the Indiana Department of Correction for, quote, safekeeping. A judge approved the order, the same judge who is now recusing himself, as we told you at the top of this newscast, saying the court finds Allen is in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death and represents a substantial threat to the safety of others. The order goes on to state, quote, the public's bloodlust for information before it exists is extremely dangerous. All public servants administering this action do not feel safe and are not protected, end quote. It is unclear when the transfer will take place or where Allen will be relocated. Tonight, I had a one-on-one conversation with Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter. He told me he supports the decision to move Richard Allen into state custody. On Monday, during the announcement of Allen's arrest, Carter said that state police still needed tips because the investigation remains open. He tells me in the last 3 days, they've received more than 100 tips. Also, over the course of the Delphi investigation, there were 2 primary sketches of a man police were looking for. They don't look alike. The sketch of the man with the hat came out during the start of the investigation in 2017, and 2 years later, a sketch of a man with curly hair was released. So I had this question.
2 years into the investigation, after we got the initial sketch, we were told to not rely on that sketch anymore, that this was a new sketch that came out that looked completely different than the original. But when we see the mugshot of Richard Allen, he looks mostly like that initial sketch. So why the change 2 years into someone that didn't look anything like the person that we were presented with on Monday?
Well, I'll answer the question in 2 parts. One, isn't that amazing? That he looks a lot like one and a little bit like the other, depending upon the eye of the beholder, right? And I've said all along, the sketches are not photographs. There are reasons that we structurally, and not structurally, but logistically changed the investigative strategy throughout the middle of this. In multiple phases. Some were not even recognized, nor did they have to be. But those detectives are going to base what they're going to do based upon what they know. And what they know comes from the people that live in that community and around the world, literally around the world. So I think that was the absolute right decision at the time to do what they did. I've always said that the 2 sketches are simply sketches, they're not photographs. It's a piece of an investigative puzzle. And when we're all done with this, we're going to be able to meld the 2 of them together. And we're going to find an individual. That's what happened.
You can see the full interview with State Police Superintendent Doug Carter right now in this story on WRTV.com. To see all of our updates on the Delphi investigation, scan the QR code on your screen. Underscore shots to drop 5 criminal counts against Keegan Klein, saying they...
I thought that was the longer version where it told everything that he was saying. But anyways, in that piece, he didn't talk about that, he wasn't doing the investigation, but he did mention his detectives. And when you hear the state superintendent, the state police superintendent talk about his detectives, those are the guys and girls who are out doing the investigation. So contrary to what's being said in the chat or what people talk about, it's not a dig on this guy. He's a nice, lovable guy. His heart is in this thing. But the bottom line is he's not pounding the pavement and doing interview and interrogation. And if you feel that he is, then that's fine. You can feel whatever you want to feel. But I'm here to tell you that he's not. That is what it is. Listen, we got to wrap it up. Jen, any final words from you?
Just real briefly. The sketches to me have always been irrelevant because he's caught on camera. He's caught on video. And I know you're going to do a really interesting piece coming up. I'm plugging you with a sketch artist. We know there was a professional sketch artist that did an overlay and made a determination, in their opinion, who the bridge guy was. But anyway, those sketches to me are irrelevant. Secondarily, on when the judge issued the order twice, he said before it exists, doesn't exist. And I found all of that quite interesting. As to what evidence he's referring to, wondering if reports still haven't been written, perhaps. In other words, it was so fast moving that the evidence is known, but it's not been documented. minute. There's this great supervisor I had, and he actually had a sign, and it said, if it's not written, it didn't happen. So they might be catching up on all that paperwork. And those were just a couple of things on Keegan Klein. I really do think, Ron, that's a bit of a rabbit hole. I believe the reason they dropped the 5 charges against him is probably because they didn't have what they thought it would take now that they're headed to trial. Right. But that if they would have something else as part of that cooperation agreement, and that would relate to this crime. Right. Being charged with something lesser. And that pretty much wraps it up. I just wanted to dispel some of the stuff out there. And just because people believe there's probable cause that another person, i.e. Ron Logan, did it, we're just saying there was probable cause.
Right. Yeah.
2 different things.
It's a conversation, and it's something that needs to be discussed here. And I think it's, valid and relevant. But again, like you said, this has so many different moving parts, and we can only go on what we have, and what we have is really ungats. We got a big fat 0 because we don't know what they got. We're just doing some guesswork here. But this isn't the last time we're going to speak about this. We'll have maybe a part 2 to this, and I want to just say thank you to you, Jen, because you reached out to me and said, hey, let's do this thing. And you know what? It's friends like you that help to push me to do things. Like, I wouldn't have done this tonight if you didn't message me over the weekend. So I want to say, as I always do, I am grateful for our friendship. Sleuthy, same thing goes for you. We come from all different backgrounds here, but the great part is that we are respectful enough to understand and respect each and every one of our opinions and our feelings and our vibes of where we go with these cases. And that's what helps to make think tanks work. Think tanks aren't a bunch of people that think the same exact way. You always have people that are, hey, testing you and pulling you and say, hey, let's think about this. I loved when I worked in a squad of 8 detectives in fugitive enforcement. If I was looking down a street that wasn't the proper street, some of the guys and girls would be like, hey, Ron, why don't we go check over here? And sometimes those let's go and check over here result in an arrest and me bringing a fugitive from just, back into the system, out of the population, out of the public's, way. And we always said to ourselves, if we have 100 cases that are out there and one of them shoots and kills somebody, that's going to be on us. So that was the mantra that we had, is we always wanted to get our bad guys and bring them back to justice. So that's what goes on behind the scenes. And Sleuthy, I want to give you the final word, even though you could probably go on all night with the final word. But what was your thoughts on Pete and this whole thing? And I know that you put together so many different theories and angles on this stuff, and that's what makes you a tremendous asset to the true crime community. On Twitter, when you're successful or when you're doing something right, you're always going to have haters and you're always going to have lovers. I have it. You have it. Jen's got it. So we appreciate what you're doing. So I'm going to leave it with you for the final word.
Thank you. I'm so glad that Jennifer said something to you, because I was dropping little hints. I kept bringing it up, and I thought maybe he was going to catch on and start a show. But I know Jennifer is passionate about this. I only just now jumped in. But I think it's really important. A lot of Jennifer's comments about this case has forced me to look closer to the procedural side of this, as opposed to coming up with different angles to figure out what happened, because it's not a missing person. It's a crime, and I'm not qualified to investigate a crime. But I always like to learn more. And what you said about everybody having different opinions, it's how the think tank works. I couldn't have said it better or agree anymore, because there's times when I will text somebody and say, or send Jennifer a message and say, what about this? Did they, could this person, she was Sleuthy. I don't know, maybe Sleuthy, maybe this way. And I'm like, you know what? That means if she's telling me that's ridiculous, it's probably ridiculous. And so I go another way. And I think everybody being open and I appreciate the two of you and your professional standpoint and being willing to work with us, the sleuths, because not everybody likes us.
Well,
Jennifer appreciates us. I know
yeah.
you do too.
But yet I mentioned several times on this stream, a lot of the cases we rely on the public to help us solve them. And it is the common denominator in so many of these murder cases. We rely on tips. That's why I will link in the description the tip line. This case, they're still asking for tips. Without the public's help, a lot of unsolved cases will stay unsolved. So we continue to thank all of the good people who call in good, valid tips or tips that they feel are valid instead of visions and dreams. We really look forward to working with the public on a regular basis because, again, without that partnership, we definitely would be in trouble. So police across the nation, across the world for that matter, we rely on our good citizens of this world to come forward and give the tips to us. If you see something, say something. And that holds true to this day until the day I die. I'll be saying that. So again, thank you.
Ron, sorry, can I digress one moment? Just one moment about the first question you asked me. And that was when we were talking about the cooperation. And I said, hell yes, he's cooperating. And then I made a reference to Cloak and Dagger. I just wanted to qualify that and say why I said that. It was because it is widely known publicly that they got him out of jail and that he was walking down a river. And I just think sometimes in cases, it's very important for people in law enforcement to recognize that the public, when something is out in public, to not recognize that casts shadows on people's credibility. Right. And I think that's why perhaps in some of your chats, people, maybe are questioning the superintendent and what he's saying. So I just wanted to clarify why I made that comment. I meant to do that earlier. I don't want to have the last word. Sorry, Ron. I just want to
No, you're good. You're good. I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying that. Sleuthy, you got some fans. A couple of guys said Sleuthy's hot. A couple of the
in my
ladies,
pajamas. It's the pajamas.
A couple of ladies say, what a great panel tonight. Thanks to you all. I don't do these panels often, and Ed Wallace is in Morocco, so he's outside the country. And it's always great to have people like Sleuthy and Jen. I'm so appreciative again for you guys and for the others like Pete and Joe Murray. We're going to have our forensics artist Stephen Mancusi. He was on. He's a retired first grade detective from the New York City Police Department. And he came on and talked about Orrin and Orson West from Bakersfield, California. He is a wealth of information. We're going to present these forensics artists rendering to him, and we're going to ask him under no uncertain terms how those how those renderings come about. And I think it'll be a fascinating show. So get your questions ready. Sleuthy, you're on notice. So
I want another at Pete. That's what I want. I want another at Pete.
Pete's a local guy. He lives out in Suffolk County. So I'll take him out to dinner and I'll schmooze him a little bit and we'll get him back in here. No problem.
Good.
And Ron, I want to thank you because there's no YouTube person, creator, no one that I ever call except you. I've called you twice. Oakley Carlson, because I thought that was a case that was not getting any public recognition compared to other cases at that time, and this case, because there are so many clarifications. There's so much that is just wrong that's, out there. And so I thank you. And the reason I call you is because you're a brother. You're a brother.
Thank you.
20 years in the force.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm honored, and I'm, for me, this is a platform that I want not just to be mine. I want it to be all of my brothers and sisters and my friends like Sleuthy and various others that I've had come on here to talk and give their sides. Because like I said, with the think tank thing, the crowdsourcing, the think tanks and great minds, they come together, and this is how things get done. We might not be always right on things, but that's human nature. You know, anybody that tells you they're always right and they got 100% success record is full of shit. It's full of shit. So, and that's the bottom line. I got to get out of here. As I always like to end these things, God bless the world. God bless the United States of America. And God bless each and every one of us here in the chat, but especially the victims and their families. We send them strength, prayers, and positive vibes. Thank you to the replay viewers and everyone who positively engages. You know, when you have words that you leave on social media, in chats like this, in the comments section, they have lasting effects. So think about what you say before you post it. Thank you so much from New York and Florida and an undisclosed location. Thank you guys for joining. Good night. Peace.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, Susie.
Good night.